Wow, so the brand new Goosebumps TV series was actually really brilliant, and I thought it was a really good idea to reimagine this entire series in a serialized format, as I was a little bit apprehensive going into it, as I am such a big fan of the 90s original, which obviously had standalone episodes. I mean, it did have a couple of episodes which did continue on from one another, but by and large, they were all standalone episodes. And I mean, the movies for Goosebumps have been a little bit hit or miss, and I think the franchise just works so much better when it's told over a longer period of time, as opposed to forcing so many storylines into a movie special. So I have to say, this mechanic of how this series was portrayed was actually really brilliant. And I didn't really like when R.L. Stine was becoming an actual character in the movies, and actually just having him make a cameo appearance via a podcast was really clever. And I just think overall, this reimagining of this horror franchise into a serialized format just worked so well. Even though it did have a little bit of a slow start, after that I felt like it was just so gripping and just so unmissable. And I thought it was really clever how every single episode, even though, like I said, there is an overarching, ongoing, bigger storyline, a little bit like Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, which I have to say is top tier, every single episode did have a different basis of a different storyline in terms of basing it on a particular item, on a particular monster, and effectively another book per episode. And I loved it, how they really integrated the adults and really gave them a bit of a backstory and made this work in tandem with the younger kids in the present day storyline. So it just worked together really well. And it really did bring a lot of my favourite TV shows together, namely Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, The Runaways, Riverdale, and even the Scream TV series to an extent as well. So the end package of Goosebumps is really strong, and I'm really hopeful that they do a second season, as they do tease a second season really well by the end. But we'll talk about all of that in a minute. First, let's break down all of the different books that it was based upon. So the first one is, of course, Say Cheese and Die. And I thought it was really clever, this Polaroid camera, and whoever you take a picture of with this doomed haunted camera, that person will have to be cursed. And I just thought the way in which all of that played out was really good. And the main lead character, Isaiah, really did get impacted by this a lot. So the first episode is really good. The second episode is really cool too. It really did show that this basement is where all of these evil crypt type products come from. And the mask, which turns her into a troll, I thought was actual genius. And I loved it, how this character, you really do see that in the beginning she is pretty much invisible. I thought actually they were going to do the invisibility episode based on the popular book, but instead they show that, you know, she is an internet troll. And then when she wears this mask, she actually gets a lot of validation. She becomes somebody. She can actually speak up for herself. So actually, I feel like this character is actually really relatable. But then obviously the mask wants to take over her and turn her into a complete troll, which I thought was really spooky. The cuckoo clock, which gives James a bit of a Groundhog Day environment where he's just reliving the party constantly. And on that point, I think each episode is really clever. The first 5, I would say, as they retell certain events that you've seen in other episodes from different characters' perspectives. And I always love it when they do that. I mean, the After Party on Apple TV Plus made this an entire series. But anyway, I thought it was really cool, because when you do see James in episode 2, he does talk about the fact that he actually has slept with Sam already. And when you see these two characters interacting in episode 3, you can't imagine how that would happen. But actually, when he does his Groundhog Day, he learns all of the things to say to him in order for that to be the case. And I thought the twist was really clever in terms of all of the duplicates have been created because of all of the times in which he's reset time. And all of these have a bit of an evil aspect to them. The Worms episode I thought was a little bit disappointing. I mean, Lucas was another character that I feel like a lot of people can identify with, as of course he's gone through so much trauma and is channeling all of this by being a little bit rebellious and a little bit crazy. And then when he gets this somewhat superpower within the worms inside of him, he can't feel any pain, which is of course not necessarily the best way to deal with internal trauma. So even though this character was really interesting, I just feel like they could have and should have just done a little bit more with the worms. But what they did do is that they got Nora, who at that point was definitely the big main player, from the parents' perspective, trapped in a mental asylum. And I just feel like her character arc across this series was really, really good. Like I said, she is the only parent that you really feel sorry for, especially as she knows what's going on, and everybody around her is really trying to silence her, and even trying to drug her in this mental asylum. So I feel like Nora was such a good character. And we then see all of the kids trapped inside a scrapbook, and how are they going to get out? And Mr. Bratt is stuck in there with them, as of course Harold Biddle has taken over his body. So I feel like all of the scrapbook stuff was really, really good. Especially when the scrapbook gets thrown into water and Mr. Bratt doesn't seem to be able to retrieve it, and these characters feel like they're going to disappear. And then of course we have Slappy, the Night of the Living Dummy. I feel like Slappy is easily the most notorious and most iconic and easily identifiable and associatable character with the Goosebumps brand, as of course he is always appearing, even in other people's franchises. And when you find out even more about where on earth Slappy came from, I thought this was really, really interesting. And I love how every single incarnation of Goosebumps has a different design for the Slappy character. When I first saw him, I was like, oh no, that's not what he's supposed to look like. But then he does kind of grow on you, especially when you find out the time period that he actually does come from. I thought the ice chase sequences were really, really intense. It really did feel very, very cinematic. And I would say the entire series on that point, I feel like it really does feel like a movie level event in terms of how it's all executed. And I thought it was absolute genius. I loved it, how Mr. Bratt is the character that actually has gone through so much trauma across this period, because when you find out about his backstory in terms of where he came from, and on that point, I love the Mr. Bratt dedicated episode in terms of exploring his past and also exploring the real life Slappy's past as well. All of those backstory tellings was so, so good. And then when you find out about Mr. Bratt's one, how he's always been really struggling, how people don't really accept him, and he's so close to getting his book published and being in the same level as Stephen King, but then his ending is not well liked. And so he tries to make up a new ending, they don't like this ending, and then he gets Slappy back. I honestly thought the way in which they did Night of the Living Dummy Part 2 was just so clever. I thought it was really, really wicked how that was all being executed. And then we have the complete takeover, the horror takeover of this entire town being turned into puppets, and we have Can-Do back exacting his revenge, the showdown with him, and also a couple of episodes before the showdown with Harold Biddle, where you think the series is going to finish, but then there's a twist. Honestly, the way in which the cinematography was coming together and the storytelling device was coming together was just absolute brilliant. So it's really easy to watch this new Goosebumps iteration and take for granted what it was able to achieve, but it's actually pretty impressive what it was able to do in terms of telling concurrent storytelling in the past and in the present day, and then in the super past, having a lot of spooky storytelling done in a way which isn't cheesy, but actually really does put a chill down your spine, and is actually really unexpected, whilst also being based on really popular and iconic source material, whilst having a number of different characters that you have to build their character arcs across this series, and also have a lot of horror moments. So it was able to achieve a lot in terms of balancing all of this, and a lot of other movies and a lot of other TV shows are not able to do this to the same degree and to the same success level that Goosebumps was. And like I said, Slappy is such an iconic villain, and this series really does cement him as the main big bad villain of this entire series. And I just loved it, how you know that Slappy is a bit of a demonic evil character, but actually now you know where on earth this character came from, as this demented demonic dummy and now has a backstory, and the backstory was really, really creepy. And then when the backstory meets the present day timeline, I honestly thought it was all so wicked. And I wasn't sure how they were going to end the series, if they were going to do a happily ever after type series, or if they're going to tease a season 2, and god, they did tease a season 2 so brilliantly. So just as Can-Do is being dragged into hell, he does do a fatal shot at Margot, who was the person that read the spell to undo everything. But in the last minute, Isaiah steps in front of the gun to prevent and save Margot, but in doing so, he actually sacrificed himself, as he does actually die, but then Margot reads a spell, which brings him back to life. But not only that, the spirit of Can-Do, which may have returned because of the spell that Margot read, is now residing in Mr. Bratt. So just when he got over all of the trauma of Harold Biddle taking over his body, he is now having to do this again, now with Can-Do stuck in his body. So I thought it was just so clever, and there is just so much more storytelling material that they can do in season 2. I mean, maybe they could bring this character back in terms of his spirit goes back into Slappy. Slappy has also got a bit of a bride figure, very similar to the Bride of Chucky. And we've also got a lot of other characters that could make appearances. For example, mummies, werewolves, ghosts, genies. Like I said, an invisibility cloak could be there. Genies, they could also be characters shrinking. There is so much material left over here. So now let's go through all of the characters one by one. So first up we have Zack Morris, who if you watched EastEnders, the soap opera in the UK, you'll notice that this guy's actually British, and so he actually does a really good job in terms of consistently having an American accent. And he's first introduced as a bit of a jock figure, but you actually learn that he's so much more deeper than that. And especially in the first episode, Say Cheese and Die, when he actually has a brutal injury which completely ruins his scholarship chances and then dies by the end of this series. His arc across this one was really, really good. And he's in a couple of different relationships across this series, but you're always rooting for him and Margot, as of course they've been neighbours for so many years, and you just know that they make such a good pairing. And I just really love the actress who plays Margot. Firstly, I feel like she is easily one of the best actresses in this entire series, and she is so much more complicated than just being the neighbour and the love interest, as of course her mother has run away, finds out that her dad is now sleeping with somebody else. She is really studious and now is suddenly having to be embroiled in this dark demonic world, and actually is the most intelligent one out of all of them, and you can really tell that with this character. So I feel like she was really, really brilliant. James I thought was absolutely hilarious, and I loved his episode of the Cuckoo Clock with all of his clones as well. So he played both the heroic character as well as a really dark character really, really well. Like I said before, Lucas was such a complicated character, especially as he has gone through the most trauma out of all of them, as of course his father has passed away, and now he feels like a little bit of a loner, has a bit of a rebellious streak, isn't that close to his mum anymore, but obviously she wants to be a lot closer to him. So all of that stuff from a characterization perspective was actually coming together really, really well. Izzy, like I said before too, is so good, as the first time you were introduced to her, you can really see and feel bad for her as she is all just ignored and overlooked by everybody, teachers and classmates and family members alike, but then really does embrace all of the dark and mysterious things that are taking place. I feel like she was really good maybe for the first 5 episodes, but then true to form, she did kind of just disappear after that, which was such a shame, as like I said, she was so good. But then we have Mr. Bratt, who I have to say was easily one of the best. So brilliant in terms of playing so many different aspects and facets to this character. First of all, being taken over by Harold Biddle, and then when you find out about his backstory and all of the trauma that he's gone through, and the fact that he just always wants to be liked when nobody wants to like him. He's trying to integrate with so many different groups, but he's constantly being rejected. And then when he feels like his last option is to get Slappy back, and then he regrets this decision when Candu is just doing all of this evil stuff. So Mr. Bratt, I have to say, was so good, and I can only imagine that the actor must have loved this role, as he was able to play so many different aspects to him, which was just so good. Nora, like I said before too, was so wicked. I loved how she immediately was able to tell that something really dark and evil is taking place, and everybody really rejects her, shuns her, hides her, drugs her. But by the end of it, they were really believing of her, and they were feeling really bad because they did all of that stuff. So she was really, really good, and I have to say, from an adult's perspective, she was such a good actress, as she was able to play with all of these different emotions so well, and was able to play with all of the different characters in a really, really great way too. I thought Colin was really, really interesting. He's the school guidance counsellor, and nobody takes him seriously. I feel like he really does need to go to a self-belief and confidence-making class, as he could be such a cool guy, but he's just always knocked for whatever reason. Of course, Slappy is such an iconic villain, but Candu, I thought, was really, really interesting, as he is introduced as a bit of a normal guy, and then suddenly stumbles across all of this magical world, and then becomes this evil wizard. And because of the fact that he was infiltrating somebody's land that he really shouldn't have done, he now wants to make the world full of monsters to prevent all of the trauma that he has gone through. So I feel like all of the writing and the explanations for why the adult characters are doing what they are doing is just top notch. And actually I think a lot of bigger productions, Marvel and DC included, can learn a lot from the writers over here, as they are giving certain evil characters true purpose, and they're not just being bad for the sake of being bad. I mean, of course, there's a little bit of that, and they kind of get away with that from all of the demonic stuff that takes place. But from a human character perspective, they are just written to perfection. But of course, before Candu, we had Harold Biddle, who was the big main evil villain, and I thought he similarly was written in such a good way, as when he was younger, he was obviously a bit of an outcast, and then was able to fall into the allure that Slappy was offering him, and kind of went down the dark path because he was so rejected and was such an outcast by society. And I just think the social commentary is really, really interesting because of this. He is also somewhat related to Mr. Bratt, so was able to take over his body with his ghost. So I feel like Mr. Bratt, like I said, has just gone through so much trauma and just wants to complete his book, and so once again voluntarily goes down the dark path to bring Candu back. So I just think all of the writing was coming together really, really well, and I think Harold Biddle's arc was really interesting, as even though he did do all of this awful stuff, he by the end of it was able to redeem himself, and then he is the person that throws Slappy over the mountain, and like I said, was a real threatening force, but across 8 episodes really did put a lot of characters' lives through hell quite literally, and I just loved all of the Brat family ancestry as well, as you get to see a lot of them. For example, the ones in the beginning with Kandu, and then his ancestors as well, and then when they're coming back in the final episode, all of the writing, like I said, was just done to such a good degree. Overall, I have to say, I think they did a really, really good job with this new take on the Goosebumps mythology. I didn't think it was going to work in terms of making it all serialized and not standalone episodes, but by the end of it, I thought actually they did a really, really good job, and I'm so excited to hopefully see how they're going to take it forward in a potential season 2. But as far as season 1 is concerned, I'm going to give it a mega 7.5 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of the Goosebumps TV series? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.